If you've been following the AI industry over the last few days, you've probably come across a rather unusual story involving Anthropic, the company behind Claude. One of its newest and most advanced AI systems was effectively taken offline after intervention from the US government. What followed involved the White House, the Commerce Department, the National Security Agency, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy, and multiple emergency calls with Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. The point of contention? A growing debate about whether some of the most powerful AI models in the world should be treated as ordinary software or as strategically sensitive technology. And that's what we're going to unpack today. Welcome to The Brief. As always, if you enjoy these deeper dives, do leave your feedback in the comment section. I'd love to know what you think about this format and what topics you'd like us to take up. Now, this story is about Anthropic, but somewhere in the middle of it, we're also going to take a short detour into one of the strangest episodes in Apple's history. Because more than 25 years ago, the US government effectively told Apple that one of its desktop computers was powerful enough to be treated as a supercomputer. Steve Jobs responded by turning that restriction into one of the most memorable marketing campaigns of his career. And surprisingly, that story has become relevant again. So, let's start with Anthropic. If you've only seen the headlines, you might think that this is a story about a bug in an AI model. It's not. You might think it's a story about cybersecurity. That's part of it, but not the whole picture. At its core, this is a story about what happens when a government decides that an AI model is no longer just software. To understand why the US government stepped in, we first need to understand two names that keep appearing throughout the story: Mythos and Fable. Earlier this year, Anthropic introduced Mythos. According to the company, this was a highly capable frontier model with unusually strong abilities in areas such as cybersecurity. Anthropic itself argued that unrestricted access to a model like this could create risks. As a result, Mythos was not released broadly. Access was limited to a relatively small group of organizations that could use it for security testing and related work. And then came Fable 5. Anthropic described Fable as a Mythos-class model that could be released more widely because additional safeguards had been built around it. Think of Mythos as the underlying capability and Fable as the version wrapped in restrictions designed to prevent access to some of the more sensitive systems. And that distinction is central to this story, because the entire dispute revolves around those safeguards. The US administration's concern is that users may be able to bypass some of the safeguards separating Fable from capabilities that Anthropic itself previously considered sensitive enough to restrict. In simple terms, Anthropic's argument is that Fable can be safely released because safeguards exist. The administration's argument is that if those safeguards can be bypassed, then capabilities that were never meant for broad release could become accessible. And once you understand that disagreement, the rest of the story starts to make sense. According to Reuters, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told Anthropic that the models could potentially become accessible to military or intelligence users in countries such as China and Russia if those safeguards failed. Anthropic, meanwhile, maintains that the reported bypasses expose only limited vulnerabilities and that similar capabilities already exist in other publicly available models. At first glance, this sounds like a technical disagreement. But what makes this episode remarkable is how quickly things escalated. According to reporting by Politico, administration officials spent roughly 24 hours trying to persuade Anthropic to voluntarily withdraw Fable before taking regulatory action. Amazon, which is both a major investor in Anthropic and one of its most important partners, reportedly identified concerns involving the model's safeguards. According to a White House official quoted by Wired, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy personally contacted US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent after the issue was identified. Think about that for a moment. The CEO of one of the world's largest technology companies was directly discussing concerns about an AI model with the US Treasury Secretary. That tells you how seriously this issue was being treated. By Friday morning, or June 12, according to Politico, the matter has reached some of the most senior levels of the administration. Multiple calls took place with Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. Politico reports that administration officials urged Anthropic to voluntarily withdraw the model while the issue was addressed. The two sides, however, tell this story very differently. According to administration officials, they repeatedly urged Anthropic to pull the model and work with the government on a fix. According to people close to Anthropic, the company was given little information about the alleged threat and was effectively presented with a very short deadline. There was even disagreement over basic facts. Administration officials told Politico that Amodei was initially unavailable because he was at a wellness retreat. Anthropic, meanwhile, flatly denied that account and said Amodei joined calls with senior officials within roughly an hour of being contacted. What's clear is that multiple high-level conversations took place and neither side convinced the other. Amodei argued that the issue involved a specific bypass rather than a broader jailbreak capable of defeating the model's safeguards more generally. Besant reportedly told Amodei he was making a bad decision by refusing to voluntarily withdraw the model, and soon afterwards, the restrictions kicked in. Now, how did Anthropic respond? It disabled access to Fable and Mythos much more broadly than the order technically required, arguing that this was the fastest way to ensure compliance. At this point, it's worth asking a basic question. What exactly did the government think was so dangerous? Well, the answer depends on who you ask. According to Anthropic, the reported bypass was limited. In a public blog post, the company said that testers had not discovered what it called a universal jailbreak. Anthropic argued that the examples shown to it exposed only narrow issues and that many publicly available models can already identify similar software vulnerabilities. The administration sees things differently. David Sachs, the White House's AI and crypto advisor, has offered perhaps the clearest explanation of the government's position. According to Sachs, the issue is not simply that a jailbreak exists. The issue is that a trusted partner found a way around safeguards that Anthropic itself had previously promoted as essential. Sachs argues that if those safeguards fail, users could potentially gain access to capabilities that Anthropic had said should not be broadly available. Now, surprisingly, this question of technology versus strategic restrictions has echoes of another technology debate from more than 2 decades ago. This is where Apple enters the story. To understand the story of the Power Mac G4, we need to go all the way back to 1999. Apple was still rebuilding itself after Steve Jobs returned to the company. There was no iPhone, there was no App Store, and there was no Apple Watch back then. The company had survived a near-death experience and was trying to convince professional users that the Macintosh remained a serious platform for demanding work. Graphic designers, video editors, animators, publishers, scientists, these were the customers Apple wanted to win over. And so, it launched the Power Mac G4. One of its headline features was a technology called the Velocity Engine, based on a vector processing unit known as Altivec. In simple terms, this allowed the machine to perform certain types of calculations much more effectively, particularly graphics, video editing, and scientific computing. And Apple repeatedly highlighted one benchmark. The Power Mac G4 could perform more than 1 billion floating point operations every second. Essentially, that meant more than 1 billion mathematical calculations per second. Computer engineers call that 1 gigaflop. Today, that number sounds like a joke. In 1999, it was a major achievement for a desktop computer. Then, the US government got involved. To understand why, we need another quick detour. Many of the export control rules still enforced during the late 1990s had roots in the Cold War. Back then, advanced computing was viewed as a strategic asset. Powerful computers could be used for cryptography, missile simulations, nuclear research, weapons design, and intelligence work. The fastest systems in the world were often owned by governments and research institutions. As a result, the US developed rules restricting exports of very powerful computing systems. The interesting thing is that the rules focused on performance thresholds rather than appearances. The government didn't care whether a machine sat inside a national lab or at somebody's desk. It cared about compute capability. And the Power Mac G4 crossed one of those thresholds. Suddenly, Apple had a strange problem. The company had built a desktop computer for designers and video editors, but the government was treating it as strategically significant computing technology. Some accounts report that exports were restricted to dozens of countries, including China. And Steve Jobs immediately realized how absurd but also useful this situation was. Most companies would have treated the restriction as a public relations problem. Jobs treated it as free marketing. Apple did not hide the story, but it chose to amplify it. At launch events, Jobs openly highlighted the fact that the machine had triggered supercomputer-related export controls. The company then ran one of the most memorable advertisement campaigns of the era. The commercial featured military tanks surrounding a Power Mac G4, while a narrator declared that for the first time in history, a personal computer had been classified as a weapon by the US government. The advertisement suggested that the Pentagon was worried about the machine falling into the wrong hands. And then came the punchline. As for Pentium PCs, the narrator said, they're harmless. This was classic Steve Jobs. The government had unintentionally given Apple exactly what every marketing team dreams of: third-party legitimate validation. Apple had spent months claiming that the G4 was extraordinarily powerful. Now, government restrictions said exactly the same thing. But the most interesting part of the story wasn't the advertisement campaign. It was what the episode revealed. The export rules had been designed for a world in which supercomputers were rare, specialized machines. By 1999, a graphic designer could buy a desktop computer that crossed the same thresholds. The government's definition hadn't changed, the technology had. And that's what makes the comparison with Anthropic so interesting. In both cases, policymakers found themselves trying to draw boundaries around a rapidly advancing technology. In 1999, the question was where ordinary computing ended and strategically significant computing began. Today, the question is where ordinary AI ends and strategically significant AI begins. As for Anthropic, the story remains unresolved. The company continues discussions with government officials, and the administration says it wants vulnerabilities addressed before Fable can come back.